Whether it's noon on the East Coast, breakfast time on the West Coast, or it could be, 9:30 in the evening in Mumbai. Welcome to another live masterclass with Fortuna Admissions. My name is Matt Symonds. I'm one of the co-founders of Fortuna and also host the Centre Court MBA Festival with Poets and Quants, and have written about business education for many years. I never seem to be able to write enough about the Stanford Graduate School of Business. In fact, if you type in my name and the Italian dessert tiramisu on Google search, the first thing that comes up is a conversation that I had with Kirsten Moss, the admissions director at Stanford. We're talking not really about Italian desserts, but about the great ingredients that go into a great recipe. I encourage you to watch it. It's my pleasure to host people like Kirsten, and certainly my pleasure to host my wonderful colleagues at Fortuna, bringing all of that admissions expertise, insider guidance and advice to clients as they pursue their own MBA. This masterclass is one of three. Last Wednesday, my co-director Judith, the former Wharton admissions director, sat down with colleagues from Harvard Business School to take a deep dive into life in Boston and what Chad Losey and his team are really looking for. We're crossing the coast and we're going to spend the next hour with Palo Alto. I mentioned that Fortuna team because between the East and the West Coast and then all over the world, my colleagues, both former admissions directors, associate deans, former associate directors of admissions, they really have you covered in terms of the breadth of experience that they bring to our work at Fortuna and help so many successful candidates applying to the world's top schools. We really pride ourselves on talking to the world. I was speaking to someone from the Comoros Islands very recently about their plans and finding out about your background, your next steps. And we take our free consultations very, very seriously, reviewing your resume and really looking to provide the sort of insight and guidance as you're taking those next steps. So for that level of insider guidance, certainly as we focus on the Stanford GSB in the next 60 minutes, it's my pleasure to welcome Tatiana Nemo. Tatiana herself, a Stanford GSB alum. In fact, she actually shared her 2-year experience in Palo Alto with Derek Bolton, the former admissions director who came up with that iconic Stanford essay question about what matters most to you and why. Maybe Tatiana will reveal that they discussed it over coffee and it's stuck in Derek's head ever since. And of course, she's also a former MBA admissions interviewer for the GSB. Also with us, Silpa Sarma. Silpa, I was asking her if she'd ever sat on the wall that's on my Zoom screen behind me, where so many of the GSB grads will grab a coffee or a sandwich. This was during Silpa's time as a former Stanford GSB admissions files reader. She also has 2 years, 2 very happy years that she spent as a Cornell MBA. So over the next 60 minutes, we're going to take that deep dive, and then just ahead of us next Wednesday, the last in the trio. We've done Harvard, today Stanford, and next Wednesday we will be covering the Wharton MBA, and of course everything that you should be considering for those 2 years in Philadelphia. So do please join us for that section next week, and of course all the many resources on YouTube and the different Fortuna channels. To get started, well, I'm going to start with Tatiana, and I guess this fundamental question, Tatiana, that was part of the tiramisu response Kirsten once gave me. What Stanford is really looking for in that group of 430 individuals that show up in Palo Alto every year?
Yes, and thank you, Matt. It's actually, it's an interesting combination of elements that the school is looking for. So first off, they are looking for some evidence of academic stamina, because they need to know that you will be able to withstand the rigor of the program. So that's one of the elements, but certainly that's not the only one. They are seeking some evidence as well of intellectual curiosity. They are also gauging for leadership potential. And very importantly, they are trying to find that evidence, that thread that talks about your sense of purpose and your thirst to have an impact. So all of these elements, nicely wrapped around you being, you showing integrity. All of those elements are being sought end to end in the application. There's no one single element. There's no one single score. It's really the totality of what makes you who you are. And so these are kind of the different bits and pieces that they're going for. It's interesting how Kirsten Moss places her role more as a detective, as they're looking for reasons to admit, they're not looking for reasons to reject. And so it's in that search of the whole entire individual that they're trying to put together through all deliverables for the application. I don't know, Silpa, if you have anything to add.
Right, I would echo that, Tatiana. I think at a high level, what they're looking for is that really strong evidence of intellectual engagement and curiosity, as well as a strong trajectory and pattern of excellence and self-awareness, as you say. So they're seeking people who will not only be great students on campus, but will also have a really positive impact wherever they go in the communities they inhabit once they graduate from the GSB. So the folks they're seeking are folks who've taken initiative and have really jumped on opportunities. And they're looking for people who have really given some thought to why they want to come to the GSB and what they would get from the experience and what would make it a good fit for them. So really it's that, echoing what you had mentioned, it is that combination of intellectual vitality and curiosity and that leadership potential, and just those, that introspection, that self-awareness.
I've promised Kirsten, Tatiana, that on my next trip to London, I'll go to Baker Street and get her one of those Sherlock Holmes deerstalker hats for this detective work. Now, when our viewers no doubt aware that with close to 8,000 applications for 430 places in the full-time MBA program, it makes Stanford's MBA the most selective MBA program in the world. As we dig a little deeper, they will publish a class profile every year that talks about average GPA, it talks about average GMAT and GRE scores, perhaps academic backgrounds, industries that candidates have worked in. I often think that if they posted the average height of a Stanford student, people would be nervously saying, well, I'm actually 3 inches taller or shorter than that list. It can be reductive. And what you're implying is sort of going beyond that. In fact, Kirsten has often said, we're looking for individuals that have insights that perhaps others haven't seen. Now, taking that as an idea, I mean, that's not talking about a GMAT score. So that detective work, how do you think that they're able to identify that ability to see through a problem, perhaps that someone else has missed?
Sure. I think to your point, it moves beyond like a GPA or a score. Really to assess that, they're looking to understand an applicant's relationship with knowledge and to understand, how they, evidence of how they went about to dig deeper and solve a really complex problem, or, what they've learned, how they shared what they've learned, what were they excited to learn. And it's, like all too often, people get a little discouraged. Applicants get discouraged when they see those GMAT ranges or when they see those GPAs. But truth is, it's more applicants or more than just those pieces, those metrics. And the committee recognizes that. So they'll look for it to other aspects, be it through projects someone's taken on at work or problem they've solved in their community. Those demonstrated instances of impact that oftentimes can tell you even more than a score or a GPA can.
And if I may add, Matt, to that detective work, it's important to understand that there is no set or absolute context. There is no set or absolute threshold. What they are looking for is how you have traveled the distance, your own very unique journey. And in that journey, how have you manifested that appetite for impact? How have you been driven by your sense of purpose? How self-aware are you in terms of who you are, what you bring to the table, and where you're heading? So there's no set profile. As Matt was mentioning, all these statistics, all the profile that comes out of the application process and the ultimate outcome, it's more of a picture of what was produced. But in producing the picture, There are no limitations. There's, just this real thirst of getting to know who you are.
As Tatiana, you talk about a journey, and at Fortuna, we're very fortunate to work with individuals with such distinct and very personal stories. Certain applicants perhaps had the privilege of a great education, that maybe their parents were both PhDs. So the idea of then going to university and how that opened up opportunities in the job market. Not that they had a red carpet that rolled out, but there will be others. Maybe they're the first member of their family to ever go to university, or they have some, talking to a brilliant young woman with a hearing impairment and how she has gone beyond that. This idea of going beyond yourself. Do you feel that the school really digs deeper to understand that journey in the context, and maybe that it was a tough journey to reach the point and have the impact that you're then describing?
Yes, yeah, I definitely, I kind of support that in terms of that very unique, that very personal journey, regardless of where it started, regardless of the backdrop, regardless of the context. If it's a journey in which there's a signal, a spike, in which you have brought others along with you, in which you have demonstrated perseverance, grit, any of these elements, those are the ones that really the admissions committee is going for. And so again, it's almost like industry agnostic, context agnostic, background agnostic. It's what have you made? It all starts with you. So what have you made thus far? Because that's going to be the best predictor of what you're going to bring to life, further in the future.
Our viewers, Silpa, no doubt aware of Stanford's mission statement: change lives, change organizations, change the world. Picking up on what Tatiana said of, helping others to grow, change lives. I mean, it doesn't have to be that you came up with some medical diagnosis that saved the lives of 350,000 people. I mean, it can be one family member, but it is just that ability to see these characteristics and how they've extended to the others around you.
Right, of course. It really is about taking initiative and really jumping on opportunities and dedicating oneself to making an impact. So, applicants shouldn't fret if they haven't come up with something that saved thousands of lives or what have you. They should just be asking themselves, given the opportunities available to me, how have I made the most of them? How have I impacted the environments around me, regardless of what environment I'm in or what stage of career I'm in or what background I come from. Really just that inherent desire to drive impact. That's what the school is looking for. That's what one should try to highlight in their application in telling their story.
When we look, Tatiana, at the typical subsets of the applicant pool, inevitably we will see the consultants, we will see the bankers, the private equity associates, the ex-military digital growth hackers, whatever they do. And perhaps, even people thinking, how many people applying from McKinsey? Are there so many software engineers at Google that are applying to Stanford? So should they be worried about who else is applying? And therefore, as we address our next question, how do they stand out? It really is about yourself rather than worrying about others.
Yeah, and to that point, I think the way that every applicant can stand out is just being unapologetically and genuinely themselves. And by doing that, it's not on a superficial level. It is digging deep and pausing, understanding what has made you, what has influenced you, which role models have had like an indelible impact in who you've become. Who are you at this point in time? Where are you heading? Why are you heading in that direction? So all of these deep internal introspection and dialogue with oneself in terms of why am I doing the things that I'm doing, understanding all of that, and then being able to kind of package that in the tremendous essays, explaining what matters most to you and why, and then why do you want an MBA? Like why now? Why Stanford? Being able to communicate that in a way that you're not kind of limiting yourself because you feel that you need to fit a profile. No, there's no set profile. There's no set, expectation. It's like truly owning your voice and being very proud of who you are, and presenting all of that. That is what's going to make you stand out. It is again just being fully aware of what makes you, what moves you, the things that can't be seen on a GPA or a GMAT score, your motivators, your fears, like just what makes you human. And then why is it that you have this tremendous appetite to excel? Why are you subjecting yourself to an incredibly competitive process? What are you seeking? All that logic, and then how is the school going to help you get to where you want to go to? What are the bits and pieces, the elements? What's the value that the school is going to be bringing you in your journey? Because certainly it sounds like getting into any big institution, it's an end in and of itself, but in reality, it's a means to getting somewhere. So, just expanding and building on that. That's, I think, not the way to stand out. Again, not to succumb to the fears or the internal critic of saying you're not good enough, like just fully owning who you are, understanding who you are, and being able to, in an eloquent and interesting way, present that. And it's a phenomenal opportunity to do it on the 2 essays that I mentioned, but then of course, taking advantage of the optional essays in terms of how have you had impact, and because all of these elements are going to help complete the picture.
Interviewing Kirsten and her colleague Will Torres, the outreach director at the GSB 2 weeks ago, it was just 48 hours after graduation. And both of them said, so many people came up, they've been through this extraordinary 2 years, and they said, to think that I almost didn't apply. I just assumed everyone else was brighter, everyone else had more achievements, and that somehow, I wouldn't make it. Now, Silpa, with a round 1 deadline, typically in the second week of September, and the hundreds of files, you and colleagues are then reading. Were you sort of thinking, all right, somebody else in the big 4, here's another investment banker, someone else in big tech? Were you sort of starting afresh and with each individual saying, okay, who have I got in front of me, and not sort of categorizing them just based on a professional job title?
Yeah, I think it's the important thing to keep in mind is that the GSB is aiming to build a class that contains a wide range of perspectives and experiences to deliver a really broad array of insights and problem-solving approaches and views that can enrich the community. So per Tatiana's point earlier, it's really, there's no sense in trying to think about like, oh, what the cookie cutter mold is, or how many investment bankers there are, or how many people from education and private equity there are, because at the core, just bringing your whole self to that application will lend itself to that diversity, and that diversity among the class is going to enhance the experiences of everyone and allow people to challenge their assumptions and develop those new perspectives. So beyond the industry or the background, the admissions committee is going to consider those beliefs that we spoke of earlier, those values, those passions, those experiences. And they're going to think about how an individual might benefit from that program and what they would contribute to it. So it would be best, instead of getting hung up on the industry or the job or the function that you serve in, it would be best instead to use the application to offer insights on how your background and your particular upbringing and your culture shaped your perspective, and then convey how you'd share that and how it influences what you do and how you go about doing something. Because it is truly, background agnostic or industry agnostic. And as we'll discuss a little later, round agnostic as well. So it doesn't really make sense to get too hung up on however many people there are from your particular geography applying, or from your particular industry or company even applying, because truthfully, they're all assessed holistically, and they're, there's room for some similarities in the class as well. I know we talk a lot about the value of the diversity, but in the class of 400 plus, you'll find that you do share some commonalities in terms of industry with some of your classmates, or maybe perhaps in terms of company or your hometown or where you live, things of that nature.
Tatiana, you spent 2 years at what students affectionately call the farm, and whether you're coming from New York or New Delhi, but just the implication, I mean, why maybe the farm, but it sort of also speaks then beyond the classroom itself. They've established that you're smart, you're going to thrive and flourish with all of that sort of course content. But how do you think in that admissions process, is the admissions team also mindful of a role that you might play in that wider community and within Stanford, not just the GSB? You know, there's so many clubs and activities and opportunities. So is this also part of the assessment of thinking the wider impact that you'll make to the GSB community?
Absolutely, and that just goes hand in hand, right, with the overall mission, of changing lives, changing organizations, and changing the world. And again, this is not something aspirational. This is something that they're looking for, that evidence in the application, in which you have already demonstrated in the past that you have a sense of purpose. You have a sense of community. You're not only thinking about yourself, you're thinking about yourself within a system, within a broader group. And so, of course, they want that to be applied during the 2 years at Stanford. Interestingly, no, like I think it was mentioned by Will Torres that education is about encountering difference. And so in that sense is that they want to make sure that every individual that's making that's going to be part of the class is in and of itself, like kind of a valuable element. But then in the combination with all of the others, then the sum is greater, or the total is greater than the sum of the parts. And so definitely that impact and that multiplying effect of having wonderful individuals with demonstrated abilities, with leadership potential, and then interacting one with the other, like, I mean, that just generates for an explosive experience.
It's one of the most elegant farms I've ever seen. And I guess as we're recording today in the second half of June, we have 10, maybe 11 weeks to the round one deadline. Stanford offers 3 rounds in September, in January, and then that final round in April, also available for those applying in their last year of college for deferred enrollment. So Silpa, take us through strategy. Should I really be pushing for round one? Should I be focusing on the quality of the application? What is your take on timing as we approach the following weeks and months?
Sure, it's a common question that a lot of prospective applicants ask. GSB, like many schools, is rather round agnostic, right? It's just best to apply when you're ready. Apply when you can present the strongest possible application. Just for purposes of examples, if you need, say, a couple more months to strengthen your GMAT or your GRE score, or if you're working on delivering really high impact projects at work that you want to be able to showcase in your application when they're complete. Or let's say you're fairly new to your role and you'd like a few more months to drive some more impact and have a more established relationship with your current supervisor, who you plan to ask for a letter of recommendation, then yeah, it's completely fine to hold off on applying until, say, round 2, when those things are in order. Because really it's important not to rush through the application. It's best to just take your time and put forth a really high quality representation of your narrative and your story, and your impact. So if an applicant, say, is really busy at work during the summer months but find they'll have more time after September, it's likely best they'll wait until they have the time to dedicate to the application process, because the process, it requires a great deal really of self-reflection, of time, effort, energy, and one would be best served if they were to hold off until they can dedicate that to put forth a really strong application. Also, folks oftentimes are a little worried, say like, oh, all the spots are going to be gone by the end of round 1, maybe round 2, there's not going to be as much space for me. But the truth is that school is not going to fill the admissions committee is not going to fill the whole class with just the round one. So there's just as much talent coming through in that round 2 pool, and they recognize that. Knowing that there's also that April round, that round 3, that one, I will say it's definitely a lot more challenging in the round 3. By then, you've already had all the talent come in from the round 1 and the round 2. So, but this, the school understands that circumstances are different for various reasons. Someone might truly not be ready or available to apply until that April round in round 3. So, of course, there will be some spots in the class then as well. But I would recommend, while round agnostic, one should try to apply when they have the time and the energy to put forth the strongest possible application. I would say try your best to aim for round 1 or round 2.
Right. There are a few volunteers to spend a summer studying data sufficiency and critical reasoning for the GMAT. I'm sure that there are a few people in the world that do. But maybe I can bring in one other element, Tatiana, with all of the successful clients that you've worked with, applying to Stanford, applying to other M7 top schools, enjoying this opportunity. Now with Silpa, we're going to discuss the essays, working with recommenders, but just this idea of, Stanford's application is particularly well structured and thoughtful. What are your thoughts in terms of taking the time to then really engage the introspection and enjoy an opportunity to step back and think about what you really want in life?
In my experience, working with like a fair amount of applicants, is that these might be the first time that they actually sit down, pause, and take the time to understand how their backgrounds have influenced them. Up to this point in life, probably they have just been reacting, and they have been going through the motions of what's expected of them and not even stopping to think, what is it that they want? So I find it personally, I feel like it's a privilege for me to be able to participate with so many individuals at that very important moment of their lives, in which they gain that sense of awareness and that sense of ownership of who they are and where they're heading to. And so different outcomes, different candidates, but in general, by the end of the process, and particularly by the time that we close off on the deliverable of the essays, I almost see a transformation in each one of these individuals, because again, just being able to pause and not think that you have to fulfill someone else's expectation in terms of, oh, what should be most important for me? What should matter most to me? But just digging deep and understanding that you are the product of a multiplicity of factors, like how your relationship maybe with your grandmother, how the number of child you were, like in your family, the different values that percolated as you were growing up, how you transformed that, like through your elementary school years. And then, like what personality traits, have manifested throughout all of that. It is so important for candidates not to feel that it's something that they are just filling in the blanks for someone else, but that this is their own personal journey. And we all have something to say. We all have experienced things. We all have, deep motivations. And so in tackling the essays in that way, like just taking making sure that you're making the most out of the privilege of pausing, introspecting, understanding, and it all clicks together. It's surprising, but you start feeling maybe a little overwhelmed and not quite knowing what you're going to get out of the introspection. But then throughout the process, things just appear very clear. They make sense, they connect. And so in doing that, you're telling a story, and you're telling that story through the essays.
Mm. This idea, our colleagues at Fortuna, from Wharton and Booth and other top schools have said, oh, we were so jealous of the GSB essay that has been around now for nearly 20 years. This iconic what matters most to you and why. But perhaps before we dig into that one, Silpa, we can remind our viewers there are other essays And so take us through those, and you know what Kirsten and her team are really then trying to, you know, encourage you to explore in the story that you're then sharing with the admissions office.
Right. So in terms of the essays, I would say, first and foremost, answer the question. Resist the temptation to over-strategize. So really just take the time to self-reflect and tell your story in an authentic way. So yes, and this applies to the what matters most, the why Stanford essay, as well as those short answer statements, or mini essays, as some applicants refer to them. So tackling these one at a time. So for what matters most, think of it as an opportunity to convey who you are, rather than strictly focusing on what you've accomplished. So talk about the things that are core and intrinsic to who you are. Think about what shaped you, what inspires you, things that or experiences that influence the way that you move through the world in your life. Think about your values and your passions and your experiences and your aspirations to arrive at, you know, what you really want the admissions committee to know and what you want them to know about you. There's no need to restate your resume or your work accomplishments or focus on that, because other parts of your application will already cover that. They're already going to highlight your academics and your professional impact. So a really powerful essay is going to showcase your other dimensions, like your character and your beliefs, your identity, your passions, your personal qualities. It's going to provide a really clear view of how your background has shaped your journey thus far and how it influences the impact that you'll make within the program as well as within your communities. It's a really unique opportunity to give the admissions committee a view into yourself and what makes you tick and what drives you. For the why Stanford, important things here are to look inward and do your research. Convey clarity in your professional goals and really articulate how the GSB experience is going to help you attain the goals. It's going to have a really clear idea of why this is the right time for you to pursue an MBA and why Stanford's the best place for you to do that. So applicants should really understand how they hope to learn, how they hope to grow from the MBA experience, the perspective, the diverse and unique perspective that they would offer the class, and how the program would prepare them for the next phase in their career. So basically, it's best to just take some time to be introspective and convey why this is one of the critical next steps of your journey. For those short answer questions, it's the thing to keep in mind with these are a great opportunity to showcase impacts and meaningful impacts to you and meaningful contributions that you've made. If really you feel as though everything in your application package kind of says it all and you don't need the space to expand on any of these, they are optional truly. But I think that for most people, there are likely contributions and impacts that their resumes or their letters of reference might not cover in detail. And this is a good opportunity to dive into those a little deeper, to expand on those, talk about, how you thought to make such an impact and what it meant to you and what it meant to other people and why it was meaningful. So I really love those short answers, and few schools have those other opportunities to highlight on some of those contributions and those impacts. So as you look through all of these written pieces, your what matters most, the why Stanford, or the short answers, the thing to keep in mind is, as you craft these, is different schools have different cultures and offerings and opportunities. So copying and pasting from materials from other schools that you're applying to doesn't really serve you well. It's best to just approach these with a fresh take, give them some thought, and really tailor them to Stanford, tailor them to the GSB.
With colleagues in the GSB admissions office, Silpa, would you all have your own approach? And someone like to start with the resume, and others would jump into the essays. Was there a sort of a natural order that after a while you said, I'll come to the essays once I've placed the context of bullet points in a resume? How would you approach it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm sure that's a question a lot of people have actually. That varies from person to person. I think sometimes you might start with a resume and then have a question based on something you see. And then you might jump to the essay for a little bit of context to get some clarity around something. Or you might start with an application and then maybe there was something that that you wanted some additional information on, and then you went to the resume, or perhaps you might start with the additional information statement for some context before you read the whole app. It all depends. It's so individual based on the particular application you're reading. So there isn't, just as there isn't a cookie cutter perfect applicant or candidate, there isn't really like a set cookie cutter way to look at these files, because truthfully, everybody's different. They're all individuals, and there is going to be different things that jump out and different things that need some clarification, or that you might need some additional context for. So yes, the application is looked at holistically. All of the pieces are important, and just depending on the circumstance, you might approach each one in a different order.
I suppose from a comment that you made earlier, Tatiana, sort of spontaneity versus being too of pyramid. Fundamentally, I want shelter, I want food, probably maternal love. So that could easily take up 600 words in the GSB essay. How do you like to sort of work with candidates and sort of break it down to be able to see that spontaneity and deeper levels of introspection that will emerge to tackle like what matters most to you?
Yes, and the way that I like to tackle particularly the what matters most to you, and then in connection to the why Stanford, is I see it as the what matters most to you as past and present, and then the why Stanford as future. And so, good rule of thumb, I normally allocate, or recommend to allocate 2/3 of the word limit to the first one, 1/3 to the second. But then again, it all, I mean, that's just kind of a starter. So the way to tackle the what matters most, it is, as I have conversations with the candidate and I get to know them more, and at Fortuna, we have this phenomenal positioning questionnaire, which, just speeds up the process, because there's a whole lot of information that we can digest, kind of in one sitting. And then in digging deeper, we try to narrow it down to probably one word, one word or one concept in terms of what has been driving you. And so I mean, there are several very interesting examples, but there's one particular candidate that what we unearthed was that he was a premature baby, and ever since he was little, he had been playing catch up. Of course, at some point along the way, it was very difficult to know that he had been a premature baby, but he kept these feeling and this sense of catching up, and so that had permeated and manifested all throughout his elementary school years, middle school, high school, eventually his decision at college. And so, finding that common thread, that probably sometimes seems invisible because it's something that you have already been manifesting throughout. And it's a matter of just pausing and understanding what has been guiding you. I mean, ever since you didn't have even the words or the concept, you were super little, but there's always, there's always something there in motion, and in constant evolution. And so it's almost like trying to come up with that, and it clicks, it makes sense, as you have these several iterations of who you are and what has influenced you. And then we try to come up with a timeline. And in that timeline, understand, the events that have been the most impactful, the family members, the role models, the instances, that have been pivotal in your growth. And then in using, those elements is that then, the candidate sits down to start drafting, that first essay, but knowing that we have that common thread, that we can thread through the history, and we have those highlights and those very interesting moments or individuals that we have identified in that period of time, which has been the past and the present. And then trying to explain, okay, and this is who I am, and this is what drives me, and this is what's important to me. And so then transitioning to the why Stanford, it's almost like pivoting into, and where am I heading? And in where am I heading, it's a hypothesis. You don't know. No, you're at this point in time with the information you have, you think that you want to, like just take all your efforts and go in X or Y direction. And then in proving that hypothesis comes all the bits and pieces, the elements that the school is going to bring to the table. And so there is where you weave in I want to, like go for private equity, or I want to pursue whatever I might want to pursue, like in the short term after business school and in the longer term. And then this is how the school comes to be a propeller in my journey. And so that's how I like to approach. And then in those first two essays, it's not talking about what you've done. It's really talking about the things that are not visible through a resume, a GPA, or a GMAT score. What are your motivations, your dreams, your ambitions? So that real estate of those first two essays, I like to truly dedicate to that. But then you have the phenomenal opportunity now to talk about up to 3 instances in which you have had impact. And, it's in that detective work kicks in, because it's not about the specifics of the context in which you were having impact or the outcome. Of course, those are relevant, but it's the whole thinking about why is it relevant? Why do you feel that that was impactful to you? Why is it satisfying to having had impact on one or many? And then there's that other phenomenal piece, like that other mini essay, in terms of how has your background shown up or manifested in the past 2 years, in any of the business decisions. And so there again, there is so much power in understanding that maybe because you are the 3rd child out of 4, like you had to figure it out and be resourceful, and you have been, like manifesting that resourcefulness throughout your career. And so again, I think it's a phenomenal opportunity, regardless of the outcome, to just sit down and ask yourself these questions and learn so much about who you are and genuinely conveying that. There was actually one last comment, this recommendation that regardless of, like having gotten into Stanford or not, it is just great to every 5 to 7 years, sit down and try to address those questions, like at the what matters most. It's just renovating.
I love about webinars with my colleagues at Fortuna, we do plenty of them over the years, and I always learn something. Thank you, both of you, for that. We're celebrating 10 years and so many thousands of successful applicants and even scholarships that they've then secured applying to the top schools. Somebody calculated that I've spoken to about 10,000 individuals for the free consultations. That feels like a GMAT question. And Rajdeep has written in, and I'm reminded of something I sometimes hear in those discussions that we have about having setbacks in your life, and to what extent we should sort of bare our soul. Often people will say, well, I feel like I need to make Stanford's admissions office cry with the first paragraph and then show, how I've sort of been through this journey. We don't have to make you cry, do we, Silpa, for the story to resonate and connect with you?
Absolutely not. Everybody has their own unique story, right? And really what this essay should have is just some depth of thought and some insight about your path and your, what matters to you in your past and your present, as Tatiana had mentioned, and how that fits into the why Stanford in your future. So you can absolutely have a strong essay that doesn't discuss any hardship or any difficulties or any adversity, so long as it demonstrates that self-awareness and shines a light on who you are and your values, and your favorable personal qualities. So that I think that belief, or that thought comes up a lot, like, oh, I don't really have, unfortunately, I know this isn't helpful, but I don't have a lot of hardship that I can speak to. I was pretty, privileged perhaps, right? Didn't really have a lot of adversity I could overcome. Is that going to hurt me? Is that going to mean that my story won't be as compelling? And no, it doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that. I think as long as the applicant demonstrates that self-awareness and brings their own unique self to the application, it can 100% be a really strong and compelling application.
Right. Now, with the essays, of course, our voices and everything that we're sharing, but there are other voices that are bringing insights and perspectives on you as an individual, what makes you tick, your value system, perhaps. Silpa, take us through the importance. Some people say, oh, everyone's going to be enthusiastic, they're going to say nice things. Does it really make a difference to have letters of recommendation? So perhaps the importance, and then some advice in terms of who we're choosing, given the sort of characteristics and insights that the GSB would love to uncover.
Absolutely. So this is one piece of the application. It's one part of which perhaps many applicants don't fully appreciate the importance. The admissions committee looks to the past behavior to predict future behavior, past impact to predict potential future impact. And this is an opportunity to see an applicant from the perspective of someone who interacts with them or has interacted with them frequently and knows them quite well. So applicants are asked to submit 2 letters of reference, the first of which will be from a current direct supervisor or the next best alternative if the applicant is self-employed or started a new job or works for a family member or works for someone who doesn't know they're applying to business school. And then the second one will be from someone else who's supervised their work. So it's ideal to choose someone who really knows your work and can speak not only to your job responsibilities, but definitely also about how you went about them, how you went about the work, and how you drove the impact. So when choosing the recommender, many times applicants, they're going to be hung up or fixated on this person's title or their background, or whether they received an MBA from that particular school or an MBA from any school at all. Or oftentimes people have questions about their writing skills if they come from a technical field or quantitative field and just don't do a lot of writing in their day-to-day. But the truth is, it won't be beneficial for you to seek out the CEO or the CFO of your organization or a Stanford alum if they're not able to provide a really detailed account of your impact and the contributions you've made. It's far better to select a recommender who's eager to spend the time writing a thoughtful and enthusiastic letter on your behalf, for one, and also who knows you well enough to write thoughtfully about your impact and provide detailed examples and anecdotes to support the praise that they're giving you. Because to your point, Matt, it's, people might ask the question, well, everybody's going to turn in a recommendation that's, has the praise and, the supportive tone and such, but it's really these examples of impact and these anecdotes and this view into your behavior and how you go about work that's going to shine, that's going to allow you to shine and to set you apart. So when you choose someone who knows you this well and who has had that significant and direct involvement with you over the past few years, they really can go beyond what you've accomplished. And they can discuss these behaviors, this working style, these personal qualities and characteristics that you bring to the table. So you're able to select a reference from your professional, community, your extracurricular experiences, but the most compelling ones tend to come from the workplace, in most cases anyway. And it's more than okay to have 2 references from the same organization. Just remember to choose the individuals who can best represent your aptitude and your impact, and thus shine a light on what your potential impact might be.
We just on that the idea of 2 individuals from the same organization. Last year, we did this deep dive beyond that typical class profile. And I think for, 96% of the Harvard MBA class, and then a similar number for Stanford, we looked at everybody, where they'd studied, what they had studied, and then the career path and work. It was fascinating, for example, to see in financial services, how many successful applicants to Stanford had perhaps started in investment banking at Goldman or JP Morgan or Citi, but many had then made a switch, often in that fairly repetitive 3rd year, and eclectic to the Obama Foundation, private equity. It was big choices. But perhaps if you have worked in the same organization for 3 years, let's say, Silpa, and your boss is really able to share that depth of insight that you're describing, presumably then you want to make sure, if there's another voice from that organization, that it brings something new for the admissions committee to learn about you, rather than, oh, it's great, it's enthusiastic, but we knew all of this about Tatiana from the first letter. So right, you're presumably thinking about who that second person could bring something fresh.
Right, right. And that's the great thing about how only one of them needs to come from the supervisor. The other one can be from another colleague who might lend a unique perspective based on a project that you worked on together, or some other impact within the org that wasn't direct in your day-to-day, or would just be able to bring like a different view from what your current supervisor or your direct manager might be able to provide. So it is absolutely possible to bring two different perspectives within the same organization. And there might not necessarily be a lot of overlap, but it is okay if there is some, of course. But I think it would be fairly easy enough to find new material if one had spent a couple years or a few years within that organization, and new material to cover and new impacts and contributions to discuss versus that first letter.
So we click submit mid-September, early January, and then of course this sort of anxious period of waiting for several weeks. And what we're really hoping is, of course, that Kirsten and the team have then chosen to invite us for interview. Tatiana, you've performed at many interviews, so let's turn to that next stage and just break down for us in terms of how Stanford has organized the choice of interviewers, and then what you can expect in what can sometimes last for an hour, 2 hours. Talk us through the interview.
Yes. So basically, the way that Stanford has chosen to go about the interviews is leveraging its alum network. So it's not someone that's going to be fully versed in your application. It's someone that would have experienced the school and then has access to your resume. And so that's kind of the extent of the visibility, of the interviewer. Now, the way that I really advise in approaching the interview is to not think of it as a transaction. This is more a relation building exercise. So it should not be approached as a mechanical interaction of question answer, or just like gathering additional content or information about yourself. This is truly an experience of what it's like to be with you, what it's like to engage with you and to experience you. So there are like those two dimensions, like that I mentioned in terms of learning more about yourself and gathering a little more information and understanding certain, how you approach kind of that conversation. But then the other vector is how will I experience you as a person? Are you pleasant? Are you a good, are you a conversational, individual? Are you engaging? Are you fully present? Because, like in prepping for the interviews, what's important is that the interviewee is the expert of the content. Like all the questions that are going to be directed your way, you are the expert. You are the one that has been there experiencing whatever you have experienced at work or any other aspects in your personal life. But it's important that to prep for that, to anticipate certain questions and then to practice. And you can practice with someone else, you can practice in front of the mirror. It is important to some degree to feel so comfortable with the content so that the mental bandwidth that can be, freed up is devoted to fully engaging with the interviewer, to reading the body language, to understanding that it's more like a dance. It's not a perfunctory question answer situation. It's a conversation. And so in building that conversation, it's like any other conversation. You need to be alert to the cues of the other person. And so it's very important to approach it again, not from a perspective of it being a transactional, but it's more relational. And it should feel like a conversation in which the content is flowing naturally, in which the content has not been overtly manicured, but it's nicely structured. So for instance, if I am answering the question, why do you want an MBA? Or why at Stanford? And then you can say, well, there are 4 key reasons that I'm doing this. And then in that way, you're helping structure and like building some sense of expectation on the interviewer as to how are you going to approach like each one of the individual questions. And so like just kind of building these as a process, it's trying to prep ahead of time, anticipate the questions that might come your way, feel comfortable with how you would tackle them. Again, feel incredibly present and take some deep breaths before the interview, and be focused on connecting with the interviewer, on having that dance and having that conversation. Because in the end, it's not that they're going to forget what you said. No, they're not going to forget what you said, but they're also going to remember how you made them feel. And so it's important to kind of tackle both fronts.
How you made the interviewer feel, that's really, really good. From a comment that you made right at the beginning of the webinar, talking about the members of Stanford's admissions team, looking for reasons to admit you, not to reject you. Do you feel that it's similar with alums and that whole interview process, where you're on their side to let them shine and all of this in the interview, rather than saying no, not good enough, and waving away? I mean, you're really looking to give them that opportunity to shine in the interview.
That is correct, Matt. And I think that, I mean, it's definitely consistent. Again, the alum that will be interviewing you already understands, that the reason that they're interviewing you is because there's something interesting in your application. There's something that has already caught the attention of the admissions committee, to the point of saying, we need to talk to this person. We need to learn more about this person. We need to experience this individual. So there's already that very positive premise, coming into the interview. And so it is definitely a moment to shine, and it's a moment to engage, and it's a moment to show that you're interesting, that you're personable, and that it's joyful to interact with you. So yeah, that definitely extends to the interview.
Let's stay with the word joyful for final tips, with all of the different aspects that both of you have shared in this session. Enjoying this entire experience, letting that joy come across. Silpa, where would you start, just in terms of a final piece of advice for our viewers to hold on to?
Sure. As we covered earlier, this is a unique opportunity to really take the time for self-reflection and introspection that most people generally don't naturally do at a regular cadence. So one of my big tips is just to allow time for that, allow that time to reflect and to really think about the things that inspire you and motivate you. Think about your career goals and what your key impacts were that you're particularly proud of. And give some thought to how your experiences or your beliefs or your passions or ambitions have shaped you. The GSB is really interested in who you are and how you fit with the class. So it's best to just allow yourself that time to answer those questions and to really dig deep into those matters and share your story.
Right. Tatiana, you've seen both sides. You've successfully applied to the GSB. You've worked with clients successfully applying to the GSB. What would your final words of advice be for our audience?
Yeah, and Matt, I mean, there are a few words that come to mind that I think might help the overall approach to the process. And so these words are risk-taking, optimism, innovation, creative courage, depart from comfort zone. So all of these to say that this is not a process in which you feel that you need to fit in a tiny space, that you need to force yourself into that space. It's not that. This process is more to be expansive, to be authentic, to be genuine, to let yourself grow, throughout the process. So in doing that, it's interesting, but the way that I like to think about the essays, it's such a creative part of the application that getting yourself to that expansive, optimistic, risk-taking sense as you're approaching the application, that permeates through what you're reading, what you're writing, what you're going to be eventually submitting. So final tip here is to try to take yourself out of that risk-averse, fearful position of saying, oh, what if I don't get in? No, like, and then shifting into, I'm going to take a risk. This is the bet that I'm going to go after, and I'm going to be truthful, authentic, genuine, and expansive in doing so.
So we fill our lungs, we stretch, and we allow ourselves to grow. Wonderful, perhaps final thoughts with which we wrap all of this up. There've been a couple of questions, some for maybe I can quickly go through a couple of them. You've both shared so much. One is around experience. That the average age is about 26 and a half, approaching 27, but there is a deferred admission opportunity, Silpa. That's typically aligned with round 3 in April. And it's a senior in college, or perhaps you're doing your master's, but it's prior to 3-4 years of professional experience, right?
Yes. So there is that deferral program, particularly the college applicants will apply during that April round, in that round 3. So that is when you typically see it. And that for the deferral candidates, that is the April round. I know earlier we had talked about, when we think about, which rounds do we apply, round 1, 2, 3. I think it's okay to target either of those, but the round 3 is typically when we see those candidates apply.
Right. And this idea that you've touched on, Tatiana, about sort of past performance, indicator of future potential, future success. Ricardo is asking, many spending 2 years at Stanford will think about perhaps pivoting into entrepreneurship, into a startup culture. Do you think it's important that he or she has already launched their own business, built a startup, to then for Stanford to then find those post-MBA career goals credible?
I mean, if that's like part of the background and part of the journey, I mean that's like something good to have, but it's not necessary. I mean, you can. Several candidates approach the business school education as an opportunity to generate options to pivot from the current function or the current activity. So there's no hard and fast set rule, in terms of, because I'm now interested in entrepreneurship, there has to be evidence about that in the past. Not necessarily. I mean, again, it all boils down to the entire narrative, and the whole story that we're telling through all the application materials, how they all fit in, how they all make sense, like that we're not superimposing something just because we think it's palatable or it's interesting, like that it's really the genuine flow of how things have been happening. And then there's always room for interest in an area that there has been no experience prior.
Right. So the last one is not a question, it's a comment. It comes from Thibaut, who very simply says, thank you for your wonderful insights. I think that's a great note with which to finish. Our colleague Haley has shared information, of course, about next Wednesday's session, when we'll take that deeper dive into Wharton. And we've also talked about the opportunity to reach out to Fortuna for a free consultation. We say 30 minutes, but no one's looking at the watch. We really do get into some very engaged discussions, the sort of things that you've just shared with both Silpa and with Tatiana. So thank you, everybody. And in particular, thank you to my 2 speakers. It's been wonderful to have both of you with us to take us through the GSB experience, and really, as we said, learning and growing through all of this. Silpa, Tatiana, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.